You were about to accept a very lucrative offer with a big increase in your pay and a bonus. But instead of that, you decided to go to Peru. Such a alluring offer in front of you, and you say no, and you go to Peru, to the Sacred Valley.
I don't think I'd prescribe many of my approaches to life to other people. If I were an investment advisor or something, or a life advisor, I'd probably have a few caveats for everything that I'm about to say. It ties into deeper understanding that whatever I was supposed to do in this life was away from what I was involved in. So after that experience with the New York Stock Exchange, another company had come in and offered me something. It was a 40% pay increase. There was lots of different things that were tacked onto that in terms of some positions in a company and things of that nature. So I toed and froed a lot on that before eventually accepting it. And my wife is from Germany, and so we were back in Germany at Christmas. I flew back over to Canada thinking that I was going to accept this job the next Monday, or start the job the next Monday. I was laying on my bed, and I literally I was doing this kind of mindfulness thing of just doing a bit of a body scan and seeing what was in my body. And I just felt this utterly bizarre, I've probably felt it 2 or 3 times in my life, this rip of energy through me. It wasn't a panic attack, it wasn't anything, it just left me with total clarity. And I remember picking up the phone shortly after and saying to my wife, look, I don't think I can do this. And she goes, yeah, I know you can't, it's fine. And then she goes, well, what are we going to do? And I said, I literally said it verbatim as this, I don't know, Marius, a friend of mine from London, says the Sacred Valley is good, what about that? And she said, okay. Within maybe a few weeks, we had sold everything up in Vancouver. So everything I owned at that point fit into a one rucksack, which I sent back to an address in Ireland, and one that I had on my back. And off we went. And so I was really going there with the intention of, if I give myself enough time to reflect, whatever I'm supposed to do next will emerge. There's an amazing poet, David White, who says something, I'm going to paraphrase it because I forget the quote, but something along the lines of, how do you know you're walking your own path? And essentially the answer is because it disappears in front of you. And there's something about the essence of that really, really chimes with how I interpret the world anyway.
Welcome to Talking Billions. We talk about big ideas, big inspirations, big topics. We take on the hardest topic of all, money. How to make it, save it, keep it. But our conversations lead us to an even bigger question, what it means to live a rich life beyond money. My guests share their practices, principles, and evergreen wisdom. I'm your host, Bogumil, author, TEDx speaker, and investment advisor to wealth creators with patient capital and an infinite investment horizon. I work with families and individuals who aspire to grow wealth over a lifetime and generations through disciplined, thoughtful investments in durable quality businesses, while giving money meaning. Join me on this quest to unearth and share the wisdom of the ages. Let me share with you the podcast program disclosure statement. Blue Infinitas Capital LLC is a registered investment advisor, and the opinions expressed by the firm's employees and podcast guests on this show are their own and do not reflect the opinions of Blue Infinitas Capital. All the statements and opinions expressed are based upon information considered reliable, although it should not be relied upon as such. Any statements or opinions are subject to change without notice. The information presented is for educational purposes only and does not intend to make an offer or solicitation for the sale or purchase of any specific securities, investments, or investment strategies. Investments involve risk and, unless otherwise stated, are not guaranteed. The information expressed does not take into account your specific situation or objectives and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for any individual. Listeners are encouraged to seek advice from a qualified tax, legal, or investment advisor to determine whether any information presented may be suitable for their specific situation. Past performance is not indicative of future performance. None of what you're about to hear is investment advice. After 20 years of investing, I've seen countless research tools come and go. But Fiscal AI is different, and it's become indispensable to my process. Fiscal AI is a modern data terminal built for investors who want institutional-grade research without the complexity. Whether you are a retail investor or managing a portfolio professionally, it gives you instant access to 20 years of financials, earnings, transcripts, and an extensive segment and KPI database, all in one intuitive platform. What makes it a game changer? Speed and depth. There are data updates within minutes of earnings reports, not days. Want segment revenue, subscriber growth? It's all there. Easy to chart, compare, and export. I use Fiscal AI daily to research my holdings, find new investment ideas, and deepen my analysis. It's fast, intuitive, and has genuinely transformed how I work. Use my link, see episode notes, for 2 weeks of free trial plus 15% off. My guest today is Mark McCartney, the Irish-born coach and host of the acclaimed What is a Good Life podcast, where he explores life's deepest questions through nearly 300 conversations, a philosophical journey that began after he walked away from ringing the bell at the New York Stock Exchange to discover what a truly rich life actually means. Mark, so nice to see you. How are you?
I'm doing very well, Bogumil. Very excited for this conversation.
We should have pressed record 5 minutes ago because we had some laughs that this audience will not hear, but we'll come back to some of the topics we touched on a minute ago. I want to jump right in. First of all, Matt Ziegler, thank you for the introduction. Julia Duffy is a mutual friend as well, so there are a lot of lovely people in our lives that brought us together. We spoke a few months ago, and I'm so glad we're making this happen today. So thank you for everybody that brought us together. I want to ask you about the early days. You might know that. I'm curious about your childhood upbringing, and how do you think that time shaped you?
Such a big, broad question, isn't it? Which I like. The first thing that comes to mind, I guess, is probably the significance of hard work and showing up, and also a very strong sense of love. My mother is a school teacher and raised us by herself, really. And so if I were to think about her, it would generally be in the kind of two sentiments of resilience and love, and an importance probably on education and giving ourselves the best chance possible. And then at the same time too, just a very strong sense, I would say, of unconditional love as well.
I'll come back to that, but I find that period fascinating, and I go back to those early days myself, and I feel like the bigger why, and we'll come across throughout this conversation, for a lot of us can be found in the early days. We'll come back to that. I'm curious about this transition you went through. You were at the New York Stock Exchange. I've been there a few times, and I actually was there when the bell was ringing. There's something magical about that building, maybe for some of us. The history of it, it's been around for so long. It's the old part of New York, and the money was made and lost, and the panics and the drama and everything else. But anyways, you were there ringing the bell. You would think it's the peak of the financial success, but somehow it became the end of a certain chapter for you.
Yeah, it became, the first word that came to mind when you kind of spoke there was probably a sense of freedom.
Uh-huh.
And so for me, I probably knew quite early on, like I took roles in finance when I was younger because I had a good aptitude for business just in high school exams and then university exams. And I went initially into corporate banking because that's where I could make some money initially, and then into helping companies raise capital when I moved to Canada when I was 26. In various different roles I had there, but there was a lot of kind of focus on companies that were publicly listed and things of that nature. So for me, I probably realized when I did the first level of my CFAs that this just is not the place for me, generally speaking, like finance. And I passed it the first time, but I said to myself, if I do the next versions of this, I just haven't had a better idea yet as to what I want to do with my life. Mm-hmm. And so that experience with the New York Stock Exchange actually came after I took a sabbatical to India, which was already prompted prior to that by an experience of going down the therapy route and lots of kind of self-inquiry and things of that nature. So when this moment happened, to me, even though I stayed around for a little bit longer after it, it more signaled the chance that I probably had some sort of runway to really explore the things that were really kind of firing me up in terms of my curiosity. Mm-hmm. And there was another element to this as well, which was some of the people, whether it was on the technical side of the deal, so maybe the kind of scientific side of it or the finance side of it, I was with some people that really loved what they were doing. Mm-hmm. And I never felt like an imposter in terms of, could I do this job? Because things were offered my way even after that experience where people were suggesting me I could do what job I was doing. I felt like a bit of an imposter where people really seemed to love their work. And so for me, that's probably what that experience lit up further. I was probably already aware that I was moving away from something even before that. That definitely confirmed it. It was nice, it was nice for things to happen now that I probably wished were happening at some point in my career. But it was also a very clear confirmation that, okay, well, of course I could stay around and things were definitely just at the beginning of a kind of a nice upward curve for me in terms of my own career. Mm-hmm. It just, the other things seemed more interesting. Like, wow, they really seem to love this. They really seem to be engaged. I wonder what that is for me.
I'm listening to you and I'm thinking what drew me to investing. And I saw this as an intellectual puzzle worth solving. I wasn't thinking I'm going to get rich. I wasn't thinking I'm going to outperform the market. But I thought it was just a fascinating intellectual puzzle that allowed me to deploy all my interests from history to political science to business to economics. But once I joined the profession, I realized that I really stayed for the people that I get to work with, that I get to serve. And we'll talk more about it. But it's fascinating how you go into a field with certain expectations and then you find something that maybe keeps you there, maybe not, but it might be something different that drew you in the first place. I want to ask you about that sabbatical to India. You were 32, if I'm right. And did you meet your wife on that trip?
Yes, I did indeed. So I went to India after this. I'd spent 1 year in London, and I went there because I'd become fascinated with things like meditation. And so, I went to stay in some ashrams. I did the usual cliche things. I did a Vipassana, and I don't know. I just really wanted lots of space, like something that became very apparent to me. And I'm sure we'll touch on this even in the course of interviewing over 300 people around the question of what is a good life. Some sort of value of authenticity became very important to me. I think there's quite immature interpretations of authenticity around, but in what it meant to me, like some sort of inner and outer coherence. So I really wanted space to explore a lot of the things that I was talking about. So I was doing more than just kind of talking about them. When I got to India, I had no plan. I'd booked one night in a hotel. I jumped in the first rickshaw that I saw as I got in from the airport. I got taken for a bit of a ride. He pretended he got lost. He dropped me at a tourist office. I got sold a deal which, based on European prices, is a pretty good deal. I got back to my hotel after they'd kind of restructured my trip, and I thought to myself, "Oh, the bastards! I've paid way too much for this." So I went back to him the next day and I was told that I signed a contract and so forth. So by the time I went to my first Vipassana, I was just, the first 4 days were probably thinking about how I'd do this person harm, either verbally or whatever way, if I were to ever see them again. So that was my profound enlightened experience. But the funny thing was, about a couple of weeks after that, based on the way this guy had set up my trip, I ended up bumping into a German lady in McLeod Ganj in northern India, outside Dharamsala in the foothills of the Himalayas. And I proceeded to, be very transparent and I guess share quite openly from that first experience. And then so within 5 weeks, I found myself proposing to IFA, and thankfully, almost 10 years later now, that's a good story. Had we been divorced after 6 months, it would have just been a typical cliched thing. But no, it seemed like something I could trust.
What an experience. And I've been to northern India and been to Nepal too. And there's something about that part of the world. Maybe it's because some parts of it are so high. Maybe you're so close to heavens or the sky. There's something special about it. But speaking of places that are high up there, there's the Sacred Valley in Peru that you visited. And I want to set the context for this audience. From what I know, you were about to maybe accept a very lucrative offer with a big increase in your pay and a bonus. But instead of that, you decided to go to Peru. I've been to Peru a few times, and I'll share later a few thoughts about it. It's a special place too. Tell me about that. Was it a year in Peru? And how did you decide, such a alluring offer in front of you, and you say no, and you go to Peru, to the Sacred Valley?
Yeah, so I don't think I'd prescribe many of my approaches to life to other people. If I were an investment advisor or something, or a life advisor, I'd probably have a few caveats for everything that I'm about to say. It ties into what I was saying earlier, probably a deeper understanding that whatever I was supposed to do in this life was away from what I was involved in. So after that experience with the New York Stock Exchange, another company had come in and offered me something. It was a 40% pay increase. There was lots of different things that were tacked onto that in terms of some positions in a company and things of that nature. So I toed and froed a lot on that before eventually accepting it. And my wife is from Germany, and so we were back in Germany at Christmas. I flew back over to Canada thinking that I was going to accept this job the next Monday, or start the job the next Monday. I was laying on my bed, and I literally I was doing this kind of mindfulness thing of just doing a bit of a body scan and seeing what was in my body. And I just felt this utterly bizarre, I've probably felt it 2 or 3 times in my life, this rip of energy through me. It wasn't a panic attack, it wasn't anything, it just left me with total clarity. And I remember picking up the phone shortly after and saying to my wife, look, I don't think I can do this. And she goes, yeah, I know you can't, it's fine. And then she goes, well, what are we going to do? And I said, I literally said it verbatim as this, I don't know, Marius, a friend of mine from London, says the Sacred Valley is good, what about that? And she said, okay. And I think a lot of my choices are probably predicated on having a willing partner in crime, and maybe a willing partner in crime and nonsense. Mm-hmm. But that's literally how it was decided. And so within maybe a few weeks, we had sold everything up in Vancouver. I didn't own a property there. We'd only been back a short time, so that wasn't really seen as a long-term holding place. But I packed everything up. I would be a bit of a minimalist, so everything I owned at that point fit into a one rucksack, which I sent back to an address in Ireland, and one that I had on my back, and off we went. And yeah, it was once again, same thing with India now that I think about it. It was literally to have space. It wasn't that I went there with any certainty. I'm a big believer in maybe the pace of life. I probably not now, or not at the time, I would have been verbalizing it like this. But I think that we don't really give ourselves enough chance to reflect. And so I was really going there with the intention of, if I give myself enough time to reflect, whatever I'm supposed to do next will emerge. There's an amazing poet, David White, who says something, I'm going to paraphrase it because I forget the quote, but something along the lines of, how do you know you're walking your own path? And essentially the answer is because it disappears in front of you. And there's something about the essence of that really chimes with how I interpret the world anyway. So I went there. We stayed in a lovely place by a river and a mountain, 3,000 odd meters as well, just in this really picturesque place. And it was to explore a lot of the things that I did, that I was already exploring, like whether it be reading, writing, meditating, philosophy, whatever it might be.
It's wonderful to have a time and a place to go where you can actually hear your thoughts. I spent a lot of my life in New York City, and on weekends we would get away, go to the woods. I've been to Peru actually at 2 different points, and interestingly enough, as I'm listening to you, these were career turning points for me. And I haven't thought about it for a while, but going there, I don't know, it's a special place. There are actually temples and what they call portals in the walls, active,
Yeah.
no longer active, or maybe still active ways to go to a different dimension. But even if you go on a hike, I remember we went with a local guide. Our Spanish is not so good, but we understand enough. And he was just telling us all those different stories that seem like they belong in a book about meditation on life. And I'll ask you about that in a second. But you interact with this world in such a way that maybe we lost in other places. People invite you to their homes. They share food. We had those moments where we felt like we are travelers in a different time. You can forget that this is the 21st century. Anyways, beautiful place. And you're so high up in the sky. There's something about it. 300 interviews, and you've been asking the same question. What is a good life? What are some of the patterns and truths, maybe universal truths, that emerged through this experience of talking to so many people?
I'm writing a book at the moment, so I'm trying to tackle how I distill this somewhat, because my mind, even when you just asked me there, just goes in 10 different directions. There's a few. One, the thing that comes up first of all, and I guess it ties into some of what I'm saying, is, I never did this to find a universal answer. I think it was more to show that it was a very individual thing. So that is just one thing. I'll definitely get into some conditions that I've kind of identified. But I really like that. When I initially interviewed 150 people privately about this before the podcast, I remember I had 2 interviews scheduled back to back, and one person had said, a good life is not getting too high or too low. The very next time, the very next interview, right after it, the person said to really feel the highs and to really feel the lows of life.
Now you're onto something.
Yeah. I'm going absolutely nowhere with this. Fantastic. No, but just, I really like the fact that even if we could agree on a lot of the same things or have a lot of the core things, there was always this unique individual twist or take on it. And the other part that I said, and it kind of relates to some of what you and I were talking about before we began, maybe even the idea that things can be true at a certain point, but they no longer seem to be true. And there's a quote by Muhammad Ali where he says, show me a man who sees the world the same way as he did when he is 50 as he did when he is 20, and I'll show you someone who's wasted 30 years of their life. So I think there's also this kind of playfulness to that, I think, that, and maybe we don't have to have this answer mapped out for the rest of our life, but it's more of a continuing of tending to this question. So, and it's okay that maybe I don't even have the answer for years and years, but what if I just know what a good life is for me now? Geez, maybe even if I'm having a difficult time, what is a good life for me this week? So there's kind of practical ways in which we can flex with that or play with that. But some of the clearer things that popped up to me were definitely, I can give you a few, and maybe I'll see how you want to pick it apart, I guess, but definitely something around presence. So if you think about anyone who gets to say at some point in their life, I'm experiencing a good life right now, there's a very high chance that at some point in that life, whether it's just in their family or themselves, maybe even divorce, addiction, depression played some part in that story. I know one person I interviewed, even jail was a part of their experience, and they were at this point saying that they're experiencing a good life. It's not to try to do something trite with all these difficulties and say now it's a good life, but there is something that I noticed quite deeply in people that said they were experiencing a good life. And that was the sense of presence for how much they inhabited their own existence, their own life, like they were in touch and in contact with this life. And, if you think about some of the bigger themes that I'm witnessing in life at this point in time, it seems to be so typical in the zeitgeist that people may think they're not enough. They may think their life isn't enough, and they may also sense that they have a lack of belonging to this life, or a feeling at home in this world. Now, not to make light of anyone's situation, but isn't that such a strange statement to be able to say? Like now granted, I have lots of mystical ideas around what this existence is, but as far as my human experience goes in this life, I've only known one home, and that's Earth. So I see there's this real kind of, you mentioned being in Peru, and it's almost this different type of life, right? This almost pace of life. And I think there's something to the ways in which we pursue life, or we're trying to we're trying to extract something from life that we just forget to experience it, or we get such clear ideas about what this life should be instead of just tending to what it is. Whether that's projecting something on social media, whether that's just saying, I really don't want this present crappy situation to be part of my life. Well, it also is. And it's not that that's viewed in any way to bypass anything, or it's actually even a bigger invitation to really feel what you're feeling right now. And, an example, even just to make that a little bit less abstract, at this point in time in my life, I have a 2-year-old who's the only grandchild on my wife's side, and my mother-in-law has dementia. So to be in the room where it's both my 2-year-old and my mother-in-law, who I am very close with, it's to experience like the highs of just everyone being enraptured or caught up with the laughter of a 2-year-old, and she's just all this attention, love, and focus on her. And then there's the despair and the absolute ache of someone who's just in such an awful position in life, and the fallout of that. And it's not that one of them makes it better or it cancels the other out. I don't know about you, Bogumil, but like for me, there's something, if I can be present to the vast experience of this life, there's something beautiful in that for me. There's some sense of this is a good life. I get to experience all of it. And so that's definitely something for me. The other part, I think, which I've touched on, but I think it really adds to it's authenticity, but not in a way that we're some fixed thing or my authenticity and I get to express whatever I want at the cost of anyone else. I think there's kind of some immature ideas around authenticity, but I think once again, it becomes about totally embodying who you are and trying to convey some of that to the outer world. I think we struggle so much in this life and our sense and our relationship with ourselves because of this lack of inner and outer coherence. Now, this is not to say that we become this basket case that just transparently shares everything, and every big trauma we have, we just throw it out into the universe. There can be a level of discernment to that, a level of intention behind the disclosure, but just so that we don't interfere with that so much. I know this is a mutual connection of ours as well, but I interviewed Tom Morgan at one point, and he was talking about this period in life where he was just left incredibly sensitized to, his response to the world and what he felt internally. And at one point in it, he said something along the lines of, I noticed that when I said something that my heart didn't believe to be true, that it hurt. And there's something of that nature, I think, when we start to pay attention to the significance of some sort of inner and outer coherence or authenticity, that I think has a profound effect on how comfortable we might feel within this existence or our own bodies.
I have so many thoughts. I wrote down a couple, so I'm going to pull a thread or two. But speaking of, presence and authenticity, I was thinking about the podcast itself, and you and I spoke about it before, how it's a special space, this 1 hour that you can have with somebody. And a lot of the people I interviewed, I know them in real life, and I knew them in real life long before I invited them to the show. But to replicate that hour of uninterrupted, deep conversation with someone, it's very hard to do that in the outside world. If we have dinner or lunch, the waiter will come up, bring the menus, bring water, tell us about the specials. Every 5 to 7 minutes, there's an interruption. So you wouldn't be able to share what you just shared in such an uninterrupted, pure, authentic form in real life. That's been my experience. So this podcast is this permission to spend a very intimate hour. And it's not just the two of us. I think we forget a lot, and I do forget about it too sometimes. But then there's an audience that takes us on a walk. They're in their park and their favorite trail. They actually send me photos from where they listen. And then the three of us have this intimate hour somewhere on the other side of the globe. There's something metaphysical about it, and very cool and very unique and very hard to replicate in any other setting. If you were on stage and I having this conversation and 1,000 people were listening to us, which might be the case with some of these episodes, the last person that walked in and standing by the door closer to the bathroom, they don't have the experience that somebody has when they put in the headphones and go for a walk on their favorite trail on an early Sunday morning. I don't know, I want to mention it, but when you talk about presence and authenticity, there's something about it. One more thought I don't want to lose. When you talked about writing a book, now and then people ask me, can you write down the 10 biggest ideas from the podcast from this year? And I tried to do that, and I haven't succeeded yet. And I'll tell you why. Because I feel like if I pick the 10 and I give you one sentence bumper sticker kind of size ideas, it's just not enough. The reason why this podcast is about an hour is because I want the audience to spend an hour with some of these ideas. I think I need it. I find it more helpful if you spend a bit more time with an idea. You reading a headline that says, saving is worthwhile, or to lose weight, you have to diet, whatever. It's not enough. You want to spend so long with the idea so it becomes a part of you. And it doesn't happen in a headline or a 10 best ideas kind of one pager. It happens when you spend more time. And speaking of time, I want to ask you about silence. And silence plays a role in your work. You have silent conversations. You really have to tell me what's a silent conversation. I kind of can imagine, but I want to hear more. You facilitate those. What happens in those silent moments? And I'm sure you're going to tie it back to presence or maybe absence in some way too.
Yeah, so very quickly, I guess the way I set up silent conversations were after numerous kind of experiments with it. I could open with anything. A group of strangers might congregate, or I've ran this in corporate settings as well, so even with the leadership team. But more generally, it could be with a series of people that you may not have ever met, and will sit in silence either in person or online. And when we meet, nobody speaks, maybe for the first 10 or 15 minutes. I've done it up to 45 minutes at one point. And I'm just really intrigued as to what that will do to the quality of the conversation. Then when we speak, then I pick up on different themes. I just ask people to share what they experienced in the silence. So it's not about introducing yourself. It's not about telling, that I'm Mark, I'm Bogumil, and this is what I do. None of that gets mentioned. It was just, what was your experience like? What did you notice about your thoughts, feelings, or about your experience? And I'm really intrigued, Bogumil, it is about presence, but to strip back our experience to what we are noticing right now. One thing that I find really interesting, and it's another way in which I think one of these big words like vulnerability has kind of got a little bit lost its way. I think we think vulnerability is sharing our big story, or how we build intimacy is if I share my big trauma. But I don't know about you, sometimes people have shared those stories with me and I'm like, this doesn't feel alive. Like, this doesn't feel like you're connected to this in any way. Mm. And what I've noticed in those silent conversations, or even just when someone catches me by surprise in a daily conversation and they share something that just feels very of the moment, I find that very easy to connect with. And there's a real intimacy with sharing an in-the-moment vulnerability. Like, this may sound too subtle, but I remember in one call, the lady said, in the first silence, my hand was closed like this. In the second silence, you asked a question, and I noticed my hand was open and relaxed. And I think we're always looking for these big ways in which to connect. My interest, and just as you mentioned, the idea of stripping things back or subtracting, I think it's helpful to also go in the other direction. What could we take away from this present situation? Almost like, what is getting in the way of us noticing that presence, or just being able to really appreciate the significance of being present in a room with each other. That doesn't involve like closing our eyes in meditation. There's no connection to any pre-existing path as such with what I'm trying with these. But I notice that even if you can hear other people breathing in the same room or the same space, there's something almost regulating or connecting, or some field that we become aware of between us. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it's anywhere near as mystical as we make that out to be. I just think that we're sharing the same air, like we're sharing so much of the same experience. It's like our heart's beating, our blood's pumping, all of these different things. Mm-hmm. And I think just when you take away the words, we've made words very polarizing these days. And, sometimes the best thing we can do when someone really needs our help is just to shut up and not even just a sense of listening, but even just to be still with them. Because I think too often when we engage with people, and this is the other thing that I ask them to do, if somebody mentions something that could be considered a vulnerability, you just leave it hanging there. You just give them your attention. And it's not like, thank you for sharing, oh, poor you, I had the same experience before, or sorry for your loss in this circumstance. Like, a lot of these words have just become social niceties, and kind of they're like fillers. They're lovely intentions behind them, don't get me wrong, but they're more fillers for our own discomfort than they are of really tending to someone or really being in the space with someone. It's not to say that you do it all this way of silence. Like, there's good reason for these niceties as well. We don't always have this space. Do you get me? So I'm not saying it, but just as some foil, like, just like you mentioned earlier, like, yes, sometimes we're meeting people in a busy room. So therefore it's important to meet people in a spacious environment as well. I think it's a flex between all of it, if you know what I mean.
It's fascinating because I'm thinking of the work that I do. I manage money for families, but a lot of my actual work is listening. A lot of, on my end, it's silence. And it's a very unique silence when I look back at those moments with clients, and some conversations they will remember for their lifetime, and I will definitely remember. But if you look beyond the portfolio and the investments and any goals you might put in place, money is a doorway to a whole world, and a very emotional world too, where, I work with families that inherit wealth. There's a story behind how the money was received or given. There's a story behind how it was created. But at the end of the day, it's a very human experience, and creating those moments where I can just be there for somebody for an open-ended period of time. I book lunches, but I'm never booked back to back because I never know if it's a 1 hour lunch or if it's a 4 hour lunch. And everybody has left, the restaurant is open. And I had breakfast that started at 8 in the morning and ended at 1 p.m. when people were sitting for lunch because somebody just wanted me to know something and hear something. And it gives me this intangible context to do the work that I do, but it's not on the balance sheet. It's not on the statement. I can't even put it in the notes sometimes. It's a certain feeling that allows me to understand what are we really talking about. And the more I think about it, the harder it is to capture. But I think it's something that you just feel. I want to ask you about related topic, complexity, uncertainty. You work with leaderships of companies, and they go from the performative leadership to genuine authenticity in the world that's increasingly complex and with a huge uncertainty around us. Can you talk about that experience, what it's like? How do you make them feel more comfortable facing the world they have to face?
Yeah, so I take this initially from my own personal life, and it's something then that I've been able to play with as well in terms of just the experience of a collective. I think we get an amazing amount of relief if we can say things as they are. And that's not to say that my reality is the truth and that's all there is to it. But I find that when we can get together collectively and in commune with each other, just express whatever it is our truth is, whatever we may be noticing, thinking or feeling, I find that extremely soothing to my present sense of stress or anxiety or uncertainty, whatever it may be. And I think one of the great things that I think really accelerates our level of connection and communication is a collective sense of sense making. When we can all come together and say, this is my part of it, and to express that, this isn't, by the way, in some sort of utopian sense of communicating. Sometimes your truth in the conversations that I facilitate might be a bit hurtful for me to hear, in the sense of it very much challenges who I think I am, or maybe even the relationship that we have. So this isn't to say that everything is just this blissful idea of now we're present and we're naming things as they are. They're difficult conversations, but the conditions that I set up for those conversations are very much around listening. It's not interrupting each other. It's giving them lots of time, sometimes in silence, but to really contemplate questions that I have around the patterns that I'm noticing. I'm inviting everyone else to, to name the elephant in the room, essentially. And I think that we often think when it comes to leadership teams, they have to do a listening course, they have to do an emotional intelligence course, they have to do all of these things. I think more often than not, it's the conditions of where we find ourselves that determine the quality of the conversations that we're having. So often, because we don't have the space to hear everyone's perspective, so straight away we're stripped of context. So now we're just, trying to compete and make sure our view is the most prevalent one or the most kind of listened to or accepted one. I think the more that we can just give people space for time to think and time to reflect and to share in the moment as to what our thoughts are, 99 times out of 100, we're going to want the same thing. We're going to want the performance of the company to improve. That will be in our best interests. And yet we get so caught up in these reactive games because we're overloaded with our schedules. We're overloaded with the demands. We're just in these tough positions where we've got competing, even internally, for what we may want to where a business to go. We've got competing demands. Would like it to be of a certain quality, but would also like it to be the most cost efficient version of it. Like there's the ways the group that are being pulled, but also the individual as well. And I think the more you can name these things, the more you can bring this into a kind of generative conversation, the more you can get the team to go deeper, and then to realize where they are, and from there to really reflect on and create their own meaning, not just go to, this is what our purpose is. How do we, almost reverse engineer that? Like from the ground up, how do we acknowledge where we are and then notice how we can collaborate to move forward? And there's a way of doing that, like, it's more a bit like how you described it. Sometimes you realize what you're doing when other people reflect back to what you're doing. Whatever way, I think it's because there's some stillness and presence in that people's defenses are lowered. When people's defenses are lowered, we can hear incredible things and not take it all that personally. Like, in some cases here, I don't trust you right now. And then that can actually become an interesting conversation starter. It's not personal. Like for whatever reason, somebody doesn't trust someone. That's not a one-way street. So I think it's a funny thing. Like I don't view this as vulnerability or, authenticity or something like this. It's quite kind of matter of fact. But if you do it with a certain degree of presence, it's done with a lot more curiosity. And if given the right space and the time for it, I think there's incredible and I've seen it, there's incredible transformation available to us right now that doesn't require everyone to go on their own, journey of epiphanies and self-discovery. And I think like you, I see the good in people a lot. Like that's my sense that I get from you. And so I assume that people have more often than not the best of intentions, and the more I give space for humans to relate like humans outside of the a million distractions and constraints. Like, so for example, I absolutely ban any use of mobile phones in these interactions. I sense that we're really capable and we're really resourceful. And yes, we can't control uncertainty. That's not the point. It's how can we be with uncertainty and still make the best decisions possible. So that's kind of where I'm most interested in.
So many things come to mind. You used the word space, and I wrote down, you need a safe space, because that's what I was thinking as I was listening to you, that one has to create, whether it's, you, if you're in the room, or if it's somebody in the position of leadership, create a safe space where people trust that they can share and talk at that level of openness and authenticity. Yeah, it's fascinating how very few moments there are when we can actually have that. There was something that really struck a chord with me when I was preparing for this call. You share about this idea of intellectual understanding of a concept, which you call a consolation prize, and then the embodiment of the truth that actually can change. And I thought about it a lot because I feel like a lot of my education was about an intellectual understanding of the concept. I can explain it back. But making it your own, it's a very different feeling. Can you talk about that? I think that there's a massive shift that can happen if you take that step.
Yeah, so like I can think back to very specifically when I started reading even things like Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth and things of this nature, how insufferable I became to people in my life when I started with talking about ego and pain body and stuff like that. They were the words of another human, and although I had read them and felt like I had understood them very well, it was impossible for people to listen to me because they're like seeing how reactive I still was. Reading a book overnight is not going to change me. There are also moments, and I think most people can relate to this too, whether it's through therapy, meditation, some sort of quest that anyone could be on or whatever it may be, a mental realization, even if strongly felt in the moment, is still just a realization. Like there's this wonderful thing where we've probably all experienced that we know our triggers, we know our patterns, we know what was occurring in the environment. And still I find myself reacting in a way that I feel I need to apologize to someone or atone to somebody for something. And so none of this is a big judgment of, oh, you're totally lacking in integrity because you're talking about this, but you're not living it. But I think there's, when we stop maybe talk, I think one of the markers we kind of start to realize is when we start to just share our own personal experiences rather than the theory. And there's moments we can touch or point to in our lives where we really lived the thing. Because look, we live in this culture where we've never had so much information. There's health industries where, quite frankly, if I were to just say drink more water, sleep for 8 hours a day, exercise a few times a week, eat more vegetables, drink less alcohol and eat less sugar, for the majority of people that would probably sort out most weight concerns, if you know what I mean. Yeah. Life isn't that simple. We're this very complex web of feelings, emotions, experiences, pains, sensitivities, joys, all of these things. And I think there's something about it where we get to enjoy the process of development or becoming much more when we stop holding on to an intellectual idea and pretending that it's ours, because I think in a lot of ways we create our own conceptual prisons when we do that. We talk from a position which we have not yet inhabited. And then so every time we err or veer away from that virtue that we may be talking about or the latest realization we may be talking about, we're less inclined to share that as well because we've projected something that just isn't our experience. I think it's deeply understandable, but I really think it's the difference. And it's probably, if you look at the timelines where people go from pain or trauma to teacher, we're probably at a point where that's never shrank so much in the history of mankind. So it's more for us that we have patience in our own process and our own becoming. And I really think the idea beyond an intellectual, and the mind is a wonderful thing, like it's a beautiful thing as well. But just there's something about the lived experience of our life, to me, equates more to a wisdom than it does just sharing intellectual ideas.
I'll share something that came to my mind as I was listening to you. And I'm thinking of learning a language. There's a period when you learn the language and they show you the words. You have the list of the 100 words you should know and the grammar rules and how to build a sentence, how to ask a question. But it's still not yours. Like you
yeah.
Right? It's not yours. It's not your language. And then there's a certain moment where you feel like, I forgot that I'm speaking a foreign language. It's been a minute and I didn't realize. I got lost in telling you a story. By the way, English feels like it's my mother tongue, but it's not my mother's tongue. I learned it when I was very young and I don't remember learning it, but Polish is my mother tongue. But nowadays English feels more like it because I express myself much more in English than in Polish. Anyways, there's a thought that I think a lot of us can relate to learning languages, that on an intellectual level, I get it. This is the tense I should be using, but it's still not mine. And there's this moment where you embody the language and you dream in that language, you express yourself in that language. Speaking of that, you've lived all over, Dublin, Vancouver, Peru, India, now Berlin. I'm curious how this global journey has had an impact on you, and maybe you can talk about belonging and then building a good life while moving around the globe and finding your place?
Yeah, well, it's very interesting. You mentioned mother tongue, and also a sense of belonging. So Irish is a mother tongue of mine as well, which I haven't spoken in a long time. And with a German daughter now, she's 2. It still hasn't, and she's speaking words from both languages. So it still hasn't fully dawned on me. I think that my daughter's main mother language will be German, because that's our environment as well, right? And then it feels even interesting, and I don't mean this in some political sense, that my mother tongue is English. Of course it is as well, but it's that feels kind of strange to say English is my mother tongue as someone who's aware of Irish ancestry and history and culture and all of these things. So I have this strange relationship. Firstly, I guess to answer your question would be, definitely moving around has helped a lot with the practice of letting go of my what I might consider to be, that were really my beliefs, that I may have considered to be truths. And I wouldn't say effortless, because you've moved to countries a few times as well, and it's not effortless to just to move into a new country and a new place and arrive and feel you're a part of the community like that. All of these things take work, it takes uncertainty, all of the things of that nature. And I don't know, but there is something really rewarding about the fact that it doesn't give me a total place to stand. I haven't lived in Ireland for 16 years. My idea of what it is to be Irish has obviously changed with that. I know you were based in America for a time, so when I went to America, I'd hear other people claim Irish ancestry, and in my head I'd be like, yeah, but it's not really Irish, is it? Like, and now I have a German daughter who I would assume will say they have some Irishness to them. So it leads to a lot of kind of confusion, I think, in the sense of belonging from a national point of view or a national perspective. But really what I find gives me a sense of belonging, and it ties back to what you said earlier about even just that feeling in another place in Peru, another time and place. So I was living in the countryside outside of a local village there, and one of the things I always loved was walking into town, and a lot of the locals would either say, whatever time of day it was, buenos dias, buenas tardes, and they'd look you in the eye. I remember one old lady in particular would really make eye contact. And even though I didn't have much Spanish, I felt a relationship forming through those hellos. And so for me, when I came to Berlin, it was a question of like saying Guten Morgen, Guten Tag, or Moin, whatever the expression might be in northern Germany here. And really kind of finding a sense of belonging by continually attending to the people in my local community. And so I'm a bit probably confused, Bogumil, as to who I am from a national point, from, of course I'm Irish, like that's what it is. But my relationship with nationality definitely changes over the years. That feels more fluid. But my conviction in that it's really about the people and the people around me, and the importance of being connected to the people around me from a sense of belonging, that is only magnified because I've been able to feel like I'm home in very different places. And now look, it's easier, even more easy to say that of Berlin now with the German wife and daughter, but I definitely felt it. I definitely felt it before Ava arrived by just the sheer level of connection I have with the local community here.
Living the life that you've lived, and I can relate to that, I think it's both enriching and humbling. I was born in Poland. I went to schools around Europe, in Brussels, then in Paris, and then I came to New York and US. The US has been home for 2 decades. And there are moments where, I don't know if you would call it an identity crisis or just realization that I have more than one identity. But I was in Paris going to grad school in an interesting moment in history, because Poland was about to join the EU with a group of countries. And that semester when I arrived, Poland was not yet in the EU. And bureaucrats being bureaucrats showed me 2 different forms. And in Paris, they would call it European or non-European form, which meant EU or non-EU, but it would say European. So I picked up the European form because since learning geography as a 7-year-old, I thought Poland was in Europe. So I walked up with a form. I don't like forms, by the way.
That's becoming clear.
Of any kind. And I never filled out more forms than I filled out in Paris, France, as much as I loved the country. I'm standing there with the form, and the lady tells me that I'm absolutely wrong. And she says, for Poland, you have to pick the non-European form. And I said, well, if Poland is not in Europe, where is it? Am I African? Am I Asian? Am I South American? What am I? How about you tell me? Anyways, they were never amused with my questions. But that's how I improved my French, arguing with people handing me out forms. So I was not a European, but 6 months later, with my French friends, with an affordable bottle of sparkling wine, we were celebrating Poland joining the EU on one of the bridges on the Seine in Paris, and Poland was back in Europe after half a century absence anyways.
but just on that though, Bogumil, I think that's something that it's also taught me, the kind of arbitrary sense of some of the boundaries or lines that we draw that are very man-made but carry considerable consequences.
They do.
And it sometimes are totally illogical. I too was brought up with the understanding that Poland was part of Europe.
I thought so. But somebody had a different opinion. I was filling out a different form, the year later. But anyways, it's the moment where it's other people that tell you where they think you're from, and there are moments where when I'm traveling, what do I say? Do I say I'm from Poland? I'm from the U.S. Am I from New York these days? Where am I from? It's a funny question to ask, but I think it starts an interesting conversation. I just ask people, how much time do you have? And we can talk about it. But speaking of meeting people, saying hello to that lady in Peru, I'm thinking about something else that you share, which is the transactional and versus the relational nature of our interactions. And it's something that's been on my mind, and I wrote about it, how I see the relationships as much more valuable to me. And if anything can be a relationship, I choose that over a transaction. And I can share my perspective, but I'm curious how you think about it. Instead of getting something, being with someone, and it's something that came across throughout this conversation, but I want to hone in on it, the relationship being much more important than a transaction.
Well, I think you've described it perfectly earlier. The quality and the experience you get from life by not having a back-to-back meeting because you don't know what that lunch will entail, or that breakfast / lunch will become. And I think for me, it's, and this is obviously predicated on people having some autonomy over their day, right?
Yes.
In that case. But in general, I do think that we get to experience firsthand how replenishing and how much there's so much give and take, or giving and receiving in a conversation or a relationship when we treat it as such, like a relationship. I think that there's not many more satisfying things in life than being in a totally present conversation where, I'm not saying that we could ever be totally free of an agenda or a hope for something, but as much as we can possibly leave that to one side and just meet the human in front of us. I think that this totally ties into what I'm talking about around feeling a sense of belonging in life, but also a sense of aliveness. To engage in a conversation in a way that you're going to both be willing and open to go wherever it might take on a spontaneous turn. I really think that's one of the things that makes me feel most alive in this life. And, I think I interviewed this really fascinating, an amazing writer and psychologist and scientist, Adam Mastroianni, who has this very popular Substack. And he mentioned something along the lines of this, where he says he doesn't believe people realize the psychic toll of pretending something is important that we don't pretend to be important, or that we don't believe to be important. And so I'm probably making an assumption about the transactional nature there as well, but where we're manufacturing something, or we're moving away from the present moment, or our real present thoughts or feelings. And so I think that there's so many dimensions that come into this idea of viewing someone as a transaction. Now, look, when I first moved to Canada and I was trying to build up a list of contacts, whether that be hedge fund managers, portfolio managers, brokers, all sorts of different things. One of the things I loved the most about cold calling all these people in my mid-20s was almost just how transparent it was. Do you know what I mean? Like, there was no precursor. It was like, okay, what sector are you in? What are you doing? What are you promoting? And then or what are you talking about? And of course, look, an amazing conversation. Oh, sorry, where's your accent from? If I was calling somewhere in Boston, then they'd want to hear all about it. So I'm not saying that so I also think that there's something about, even if we could be more transparent about the fact that this is a transaction right now. Do you know what I mean? I think there's more, just as long as the pretense, or there's not a big performance in that transaction, there can also be a great amount of humanity in just a straight up conversation. But I think there's something about a contact with what is. Do you know what I mean? So that's also another element to it, as far as I kind of see it.
It's fascinating because over the years, and I've been investing and working for 20 years, I realized very quickly, and maybe it's because of the people I got to work with and my mentors, that building relationships in life has much bigger value and importance to me than transactions. And I did interact with brokers, some of them incredible people, some of them became friends that would call with a very clear agenda. And the ones that I think built a lasting business were actually the ones that turned this transactional nature of their practice into a relationship. Somebody would take the phone call, right? Because it's Mark.
Yeah.
And I think it's the moment you realize that somebody will take your phone call because you're Mark, then you can have a whole different conversation. And you might end up closing a sale if that's your goal, but it's a whole different mindset. It makes me think of the concept of an infinite game, James Carr's. I'm sure you're familiar, but I picked up tennis all over again after a very long break. And it's a fascinating game on many levels, but I'll focus on one aspect that has something to do with this part of the conversation. For a long time, we were playing to keep the ball in the air for as long as possible, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And we had friends that come and we would play. So the goal was to have an open-ended play, and hopefully the ball never ends up in the net or out. So an infinite game. And we had laughs, we had fun. And at some point we invited someone who told us that's not how you play tennis. And we know that's not how you play tennis. You play tennis to win or lose. As many, many games in our life, right? And we played along, and the game changed, the dynamic changed completely. The laughs went away, the smiles went away, the energy shifted, and we were here to win. I'm gonna send a ball in a way that there's not a chance that you're gonna hit it back, right? That changed. And I was watching this being me, and I thought, wow, it's just a small experiment, but if you change the rules slightly and you turn a relationship of us playing back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, to I'm gonna make sure you can't hit it. It changes the game. Food for thought, but it made me think that I do want to have more infinite, open-ended games in my life than the ones that end up with a clear winner and loser.
For me, it definitely speaks to almost instant gratification. Well, actually, that doesn't even really apply, because if you have a really meaningful conversation with someone, there is an instant gratification. But I do think it's almost this bigger picture. And there's a trust in that as well. Like, if I invest in another human being genuinely, they'll be willing to receive something from me, or they'll be wanting to give or help with something as well. I see it very similar to you in terms of just, I view these relationships as a long-term thing rather than what's the lowest hanging fruit that I could grab right now,
I think there's room in life for the finite games and the infinite games. Don't get me wrong. It's fun to watch a game that ends and there's a score, and that's fun.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And tennis is one of those places where it's fun to watch and, I enjoy it. But there are moments where you feel like you get to choose what kind of game you're going to play on whichever court you find yourself in. And if you think about it a bit longer, you realize it might be a different game that you showed up for. I'll leave it at that. Mark, I have one last big question for you. We're talking about good life. How do you think about success? Do you have a definition of success?
A few components come to mind for me. One for me is definitely that I get to spend my days doing something that I really care about. It doesn't mean that it's easy or involves a light amount of work. It could be very challenging, but I really feel I need to care about what I'm doing, and irrespective of outcome as well, I would probably say. There is also a sense of just that affords me also to spend time with people that I care about and that I love, and just purely even then just from a financial perspective, that I can do something that I care about that supports the lifestyle for myself, my family, or whatever it may be. And I think for me, trying to find the sweet spot of that expression over the last few years has been the labor of love, the challenge, the joy, the uncertainty, and the finding out. But it feels like I've kind of created the foundation for something that I hope to enjoy for many more years in this life. But it probably would involve those components.
Well, I love the sound of that. What a wonderful conversation. It's going to stay with me for a while. I'll be thinking about some of the topics we talked about, and I'm sure this audience will as well. For everybody, look up Mark, his wonderful podcast. And I'm very grateful for this hour that we had together. Thank you so much, Mark.
That was an absolute joy, Bogumil. Thank you very much.
Before you go, just a quick reminder. If you want to check out Fiscal AI and see how it can upgrade your research process, subscribe using the link in the show notes to get a free 2-week trial plus 15% off. You were listening to Talking Billions. We talk about big ideas, big inspirations, big topics. We take on the hardest subject of all, money. But our conversations lead us to an even bigger question: what it means to live a rich life beyond money. If you enjoyed the show, please take a moment and follow, subscribe, rate, and share with friends and family. We rely on word of mouth to promote the show. One click for you means the world to us. Thank you. Until next time, your host, Bogumil Baranowski.